Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at part 2 of lesson 16 in your Ready workbook. We're going to be on page 162. So if you don't have your Ready workbook out yet, make sure you pause the video and go ahead and get out your Ready workbook, some kind of writing utensil, a pencil or a pen, and a yellow highlighter. You're going to need all of those materials today. So go ahead, pause the video, and take care of that for me now. Okay, so now that you're back, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, page 162. So the first thing we need to do is rewrite the title of our lesson at the top of the page. And the title of our lesson is Analyzing Point of View. And I have an abbreviation for point of view, capital POV. So if you ever see me write capital POV, just know that that stands for point of view. And we know that analyzing means that we're going to break something down, take a closer look at it, and we know point of view and perspectives are similar, so we're going to look at different perspectives today. And perspectives, we have 3 different kinds that we're going to pay attention to. We have first person, second person, and third person. First person perspective is when the character is the one talking in any kind of text. So the character is the one telling you what's happening. They're telling the story. Usually first person, they use pronouns like I, me, my, we. Second person, a little bit different. Second person perspective is when the author is doing the talking. The author of the text is telling you what happens. They use the pronoun you a bunch. Um, Typically, second person can be found in letters or directions. So keep that in mind. And last but not least, we have third person perspective. And a third person is when you have a narrator who is not in the story, who's telling the story. So, the narrator, who is not a character in the story, is the one telling you what's happening. Um, Third person deals with he, she, it, they, them, all of those pronouns. All right, so that's just a little refresher. You have more notes on first, second, and third person in your source book, so don't forget those are there for you if you need to go back and refresh yourself on those. All right, so next we're going to talk about the purpose of the text that we're going to be reading today. The text that we're going to be reading today is fiction, so the purpose of that is to entertain. The three main purposes that we look at in seventh grade are to persuade, to inform, and to entertain. Anything that is fiction, the purpose 99.9% of the time is to entertain the reader. It will be to entertain the reader unless we tell you differently. So that's why I have entertain highlighted in yellow. So when you copy this down, you may want to highlight it in yellow as well. So that way you know um, that the purpose of the text that we're looking at today is to entertain. And don't forget, anything that is written in red, you need to also make sure you have it written in your source book. So, just a reminder. All right, so whenever we are dealing with point of view, we have to make sure we pay close attention to the tone. We have 3 types of tones that we're going to look at. We have positive, negative, and neutral. I have a plus sign beside the positive tone, a negative sign beside the negative, and a 0 for the neutral. So, tone, when you are trying to distinguish tone, you have to decide whether or not it's positive, negative, or neutral. And when you've done that, you have to think of some feeling words that can describe that positive, negative, or neutral tone. So, for example, if you have a negative tone, you may say that it's grim or gloomy or maybe depressed. If you have a positive tone, you may say it's happy or cheerful. So you need those feeling words to go along with it. Now, yesterday we talked about how tone and mood were congruent. I'm going to do a little refresher for us on that. We're bringing a little bit of math into ELA with our congruent sign. So, congruent means that something is very, very similar, but it does have a slight difference. And tone and mood are very similar to one another, but there is a slight difference. So tone, whenever you're considering tone, you need to think about um how the author portrays the characters and how the character feels in the text. Mood, on the other hand, is how the reader feels when they are reading it. So think tone, characters, mood, reader. And down below, underneath the mood, we have a smiley face emoji to represent our positive mood. We have a crying emoji to represent our negative mood. And then our neutral is represented by the word meh. I also like to think of the emoji that has the eyes and the little straight across mouth because he's kind of indifferent, right? So, down below, before we can start reading the story, we have to look at our genre. Anytime the text tells you the genre, you need to make sure that you pay close attention to it because it is important. And the genre for the text we're looking at today, Places of Disinterest, is realistic fiction. So, let's take a minute to refresh on what we know about realistic fiction. So, realistic fiction is definitely realistic, but it's not real. It's not real, but it could be real. We know fiction is something that's made up, but realistic fiction, um, it definitely has believable qualities about it. Realistic fiction, the purpose of it is to also entertain. So don't forget, anytime you have any kind of fictional text, the purpose is to entertain. Um, it is told in chronological order, so that is the text structure, chronological order. Um, it's told from beginning to end. The setting for realistic fiction is also realistic. It's gotta be a realistic setting, maybe a place that you are potentially familiar with. The characters are also realistic. They're not going to have superpowers or anything like that. That doesn't make them realistic. It will also be told in a specific point of view. It could potentially be first or third person, depending on the words they use. There will be conflict in realistic fiction, and that conflict will be realistic once again. So the problems that the characters deal with are believable, and then there will be a theme, and we know that the theme is the overall message that is learned by our main character. All right, so let's look at our directions. They tell us to read this story about Raymond and Blanca's trip to an art museum. So, just based on these directions, I already know the names of my two characters and I know what they're doing. I know that my two characters are Raymond and Blanca, and I know that they have been to a trip to an art museum. So, that's pretty important. So before we can read, we have to make sure we box in the title of our text. We box in the title of our text to bring our attention to it, of course, and to help us analyze it and break it down even further. You can look at the title of a story or any kind of text, really, and that can help you make an assumption as to what you think the rest of the text is going to be about. And you can also distinguish positive and negative connotations based on the words that make up the title of the text. So the title of this text is Places of Disinterest. So, disinterest. We know that that means that you're probably not interested in whatever it is you're doing, right? And disinterest has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. If you're disinterested in something, you're not really into it. You don't really like it. So that tells me there's probably going to be some kind of negative connotation that goes along with this in the story, but we'll see. So our next step is to number our paragraphs. In this section of the story, we have 5 paragraphs, and every time we have an indentation, that represents a new paragraph. And take special note down at the bottom of the text, it says continued. So I know that this is not the full text, this is only part of it. You will get to read the rest of this story on the next page whenever you get ready to do part 3. But for today, we're just looking at this section, so that's pretty easy. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read these 5 paragraphs out loud to us. So make sure you are following along with me. Another Inez family Saturday afternoon outing was drawing to a close, and for Blanca and Raymond's parents, the car ride home from the art museum couldn't be over fast enough. Blanca stared stonily out the car window while Raymond beamed. "That is the absolute last time you get to pick where we go," Blanca exclaimed and scowled at her older brother. The entire exhibit was filled with paintings that looked like someone ran around splashing buckets of paint randomly all over the canvas. "That's called expressionism," Raymond eagerly explained. "Each painting is meant to evoke a feeling. What were some of the emotions you experienced in the exhibit?" "I felt quite frustrated and exhausted." Blanca sighed dramatically, and then she exclaimed, "And I didn't appreciate that security guard being so rude to me. You sat on a priceless metal sculpture. He was just doing his job." And we know that this is continued. So that is our passage, Places of Disinterest by Rowena Jackson. So next, we're going to try to analyze this passage and see what we can make of the characters Raymond and Blanca. So we're going to look at some of Blanca's actions first. So in paragraph number 1, that very last sentence says that Blanca stared stonily out the car window. So if you were staring stonily, do you think that you were happy? I would say chances are probably not, right? If you have a stony look on your face, it's kind of frozen, right? But not in a happy position. So right now, that's Blanca staring stonily out the window. So that's what she's doing. That's an action. So in paragraph 2, Blanca says, "That is the absolute last time you get to pick where we go," she exclaimed and scowled at her older brother. So, we know she was not very pleased about the destination her brother chose for her family to go to, right? And she exclaims that, so that means she kind of puts it out there. She's exclaiming, and she's also scowling. So if you scowl at someone, that means that you kind of twist up your face, and you do not look very happily at them. You are frowning, and maybe your forehead is creased, and you are not happy. So that's something that Blanca is doing. She's scowling, right? And because she does that, we can infer that she's not a very happy camper right now. In paragraph 4, she says she feels frustrated and exhausted. So, whenever her brother asks her what emotions she's feeling, she says she felt frustrated and exhausted. So, these describe her emotions when they were visiting the art exhibit. All right, so then of course, she sighs dramatically, and then she exclaims she didn't appreciate that the security guard was being so rude to her. So we know that, based on what her brother tells us in paragraph 5, that she sat on a statue. And I can assume that the security guard was probably not very nice to her whenever he was telling her to get off the priceless metal sculpture, right? So it sounds like Blanca did not have a very good time at the museum based on the evidence that we have circled in the passage, her actions and emotions. All right, so now we are going to take a minute and look at Raymond and see how his actions and emotions differ a little bit from Blanca's. So, in paragraph number 1, that last phrase, it says Raymond beamed. So, if you are beaming, do you think you're happy or kind of upset? Probably happy, right? So, I want you to think of like a beam of like sunshine. Sunshine's warm. So Raymond is beaming. He is like a beam of light pretty much. He is happy. He is excited. Even though Blanca is upset and staring stonily out the window, Raymond is beaming and we know he is happy. In paragraph number 3, Raymond says, "That's called expressionism," Raymond eagerly explained, and then he goes on to tell us that the paintings are meant to evoke feelings. So, if he is eagerly explaining something, do you think he's excited about it? I would say probably so. If you are very interested in something and you are eagerly explaining about it, you're excited to tell people what you know about it. And right now, that's Raymond. He knows a lot about expressionism, and he is excited to let us know that. Okay, so next, oh, and it's a little bit ahead there. So, based on what we know about Blanca and her actions and emotions, can you say the tone that represents the tone that is with her in the text, would you say is positive or negative for Blanca? I would say probably kind of negative, right? So we know she's staring stonily, she's scowling, and she says she feels frustrated and exhausted. That all has negative tone surrounding it, right? So out beside Blanca's name underneath my character list, I'm gonna put a negative sign for negative tone. Raymond, on the other hand, I would say he's very positive, right? He's beaming, he's eagerly explaining. Even in paragraph number 5, he calls the statue priceless. If he calls something priceless, it's probably he considers it valuable, it's something he likes. So Raymond, the tone that surrounds him is pretty positive, I would say. So, now that we have analyzed Raymond and Blanca, let's go ahead and move on down to the bottom half of the workbook and get ready to further analyze point of view by completing the chart. So our directions say this. We have to explore how to answer this question. How does the author contrast the points of view of the different characters? So when we have to figure out how the author contrasts the points of view of Blanca and Raymond. When you're contrasting something, you're trying to figure out how it's different. So in other words, we're trying to figure out how Blanca and Raymond look at their museum trip in different ways. So, to figure out each character's point of view, we have to identify words and phrases that reveal his or her thoughts, feelings, and attitudes toward story events. We have to underline text evidence that suggests how Blanca feels about the afternoon in the art museum, and then we have to circle evidence that shows how Raymond feels about the same experience. And then we have to complete the chart below and compare the chart's point of view compare the character's point of view in the chart. All right, so let's look back. We've already underlined several things for both Blanca and Raymond. So we know that Blanca's feeling pretty negative, right, about her trip to the museum, whereas Raymond is he's excited and happy. He's overall positive about it. So let's look at the first section of our chart, which deals with Blanca. So underneath the character section, we know we're looking at Blanca. And some of the evidence for Blanca that we found in the passage is this. We know she's staring stonily out the window. She doesn't want Raymond to pick an activity again. She wasn't very pleased with his choice in the museum, right? And she disliked the paintings. She didn't understand them, right? She said that it looked like people just threw paint all over a canvas at random. And then at the end of the day, she sat on a sculpture. So, all of this is evidence that leads us to develop Blanca's point of view. And her point of view for their art museum visit is that she doesn't enjoy art and thinks the museum is boring. So that's how she feels about it. That's her way of looking at their trip. And everything that we wrote in the evidence section helps us get to Blanca's point of view. So now let's go on down to the bottom and we'll do Raymond next. So first we have to figure out evidence for Raymond, and we've already found a good bit of evidence to describe how he feels, right? His thoughts and feelings and actions back up in the passage. So I'm going to go ahead and list a few of those there. So we know Raymond is beaming. He understands expressionism, which is the art style that they viewed while at the museum. And then in the last paragraph, he calls the sculpture priceless. So all of this is evidence, Raymond's thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions that help lead us to his point of view. And when I say his point of view, I mean his way of looking at their trip to the art museum. And Raymond's point of view is that he enjoyed his time at the museum because he understands and appreciates fine art. So he likes it because he understands it and it's something he's excited about. So that is Raymond's point of view for this. So down at the bottom, we have a question to answer in bold. So I'm going to read it to us and then we'll work through it. So, Blanca and Raymond have contrasting perspectives about their experience at the museum. How do the characters' interests and feelings affect their point of view? So, based on what we just filled out in the chart, we already know that they have contrasting perspectives, right? So, we know Blanca did not enjoy the trip to the museum. She hated it. Raymond, on the other hand, loved it, right? Because he likes art and he's excited about that. So, those two perspectives are very different, right? They're contrasting. So now we have to figure out how the character's personal interests and feelings affect their point of view or their particular way of looking at the situation that they're in. So I want you to take a minute and see if you can come up with an answer for this. See if you can think about the character's interests and feelings and how that affects their point of view. If you need to look back up at the passage, feel free to do that. But go ahead and write your answer in your workbook, pause the video, and when you come back, we are going to discuss a potential right answer and why that answer is correct. So go ahead and pause the video now and answer this question for me. Okay, guys, so you're back. I'm assuming that you have attempted to answer the question in your own copy of the Ready Workbook. So now we are going to work through it together. So, one more time, our question was that Blanca and Raymond have contrasting perspectives about their experience at the museum. How do the characters' interests and feelings affect their point of view? All right, so this is the answer that I came up with. Raymond is interested in art and understands what the artists are trying to achieve. He enjoys his time at the museum much more than Blanca, who finds the museum boring. Okay, so we know Raymond is interested in art. That's one of his interests. And he understands what the artists are trying to achieve. We know this because he is able to explain what expressionism is to his sister Blanca. So those are his interests and his feelings. So we know based on that, he does enjoy his time at the museum a lot more than Blanca, who finds the museum boring. So we know that she finds the museum boring because she is not interested in art. She doesn't understand expressionism, right? And she just overall kind of had a bad experience at the museum whenever they were there. So, this answer is just one of many that you could have come up with, but I want you to have a version of the correct answer. So, that's pretty much all I've got for part two. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and we'll work through any issue that you have together, or we can set up a Google Meet to further discuss. So, next, you're going to be moving on to part three, which Miss Murray has recorded. And like I said, if you have any questions, just be sure to let me know. And with that, I will see you guys later.